Hello everyone, and welcome to the Darkest Hour. I'm your host, Amanda Jane. Tonight we explore stories of haunted homes and hostels, while simultaneously delving into some of the darker corners of human existence, horrors going beyond supernatural apparitions. Sometimes a place where a traveler seeks respite is a place they find themselves trying to escape. The walls holding secrets, or times when a dream home becomes a nightmare. These encounters have a way of shattering the feeling of safety in an instant, the very place that they once felt most comfortable, where they sought solace. It's there they found themselves trapped in a nightmare, one that would haunt them for a lifetime. These encounters can leave scars that run deep, lingering long after any physical wounds have healed. The kind of terror and experience that seeps into your very being, never truly leaving. But remember, as we dive into the depths of these stories, there's a catharsis in sharing our fears and confronting the darkness. So, let's get started, shall we? Last summer, I was staying by the beach at my grandmother's before going away to college. There were too many people out during the day, so I only went late in the evenings. There were always a few others around who seemed to be doing the same as myself, but it was usually quiet. One night, a man in a blue tracksuit walked 10 to 15 feet behind me for over 30 minutes without passing. So I stopped to check my phone while he went by. Since I was close to my turnaround point, I just started back the way I came from and went home. The next night, I saw the same man. We passed one another shortly after I arrived, and 15 minutes later, he was behind me again. Still keeping the same distance, no matter my speed. I didn't like that at all. A couple was walking towards me, so I ran up to them like we were old friends, and they were kind enough to play along. The guy that was following continued along his way, and I made it home without seeing him again. After that, I skipped my beach walks for a week, hoping that would be the end of it. When I returned, it was a little later than my usual time, and there was no sign of him for the first leg of my route. My turnaround point is a pier about a mile from where I start, and there was a man standing at the end of it. He was on his phone and facing the water. I didn't think that he even noticed me. Then, about halfway back, I saw him in the distance. Other than paranoia from my previous encounters, I didn't really have a valid reason to be suspicious. He was so far away I couldn't even see his face, and I would be off the beach before he caught up. But I still walked a little faster. So fast that I bumped into a girl that I actually knew from school. She was also staying with relatives and wouldn't let me get a word in. So by the time I thought to look back for the mystery man, he was gone. I was instantly relieved and talked with the girl for a few more minutes. Once we parted ways, I'd forgotten all about the man behind me and walked straight for my grandmother's. It was just past 9, and the whole street was silent. All of her neighbors were elderly and tended to go to bed early. When I was only 3 houses down from my destination, someone walked out from behind a large truck and stood blocking the sidewalk. It was the guy I saw earlier that night. He was wearing the same black hoodie with a white design on the front. My heart dropped. This time, he was close enough that I recognized his face, and it was the same guy who had been following me all the other times. My panic kicked into overdrive as he asked if I was lost. I said my house was just next to us and began walking towards it. But then he pointed to my grandmother's actual house and asked why I went into that one all the previous nights. I guess he had followed me more often than I realized. What do you even say to that? The guy was smirking like this was some kind of sport, and I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of being afraid. He kept trying to creep closer, but I wasn't letting him get anywhere near close enough to grab me. My mouth began operating under pure survival instinct. I said, "Oh, I just wanted to get in front of a Ring doorbell cam." That instantly stopped his advance, but only for a moment. After a brief hesitation, he laughed and said, "I'd be worth the risk." Then he lunged at me. I barely moved in time, and next he began chasing me. I screamed as loudly as I could. I didn't even care about causing a scene. That was the goal. I wanted to wake the whole neighborhood up. I took maybe 4 or 5 steps towards my grandmother's before being hit from behind and knocked to the ground. We were in the middle of the street, and I continued screaming until a hand covered my mouth. Thankfully, I had already gotten the whole neighborhood's attention and watched in relief as every house began to light up. My grandmother was the first outside, but 3 neighbors were right behind her. My attacker got off and actually stepped on me as he scrambled to get away. The police were called, and I was taken inside where I recounted my story at least 20 times before the night was over. The cops said it was probably the guy's first attempt at attacking anyone, just because it was so sloppy. Apparently, if you want to grab someone in a neighborhood, you need to take them by surprise before they can draw attention. Basically, I'm just lucky my assailant was a rookie. It's always bothered me that they never caught the guy. I hated to imagine what he might be doing to other girls like me, but now, nearly a year later, I'm writing this because they finally found him. He was arrested after 4 guys beat the living shit out of him for dragging a poor woman beneath the same pier I saw him standing on during the night of my attack. The men who saved her were college guys having a drunk night on the beach when they heard the woman's muffled cries. My heart goes out to the victim. I haven't been out alone since my incident, so I can only imagine how painful her recovery will be. But I'm glad that prick will be off the streets for a while. I hope prison is extremely hard for him. Anyway, thanks for listening. Writing this has helped me get a little closure on that messed up chapter in my life. We were traveling in Fiji on a tight budget and found a hostel with a price significantly lower than all the rest. We booked it immediately and got in the room. It was a bit grim, but did the job. The man on reception looked a bit surprised that we were there, but I didn't notice this to be a bad thing. The thing I did notice is that there were just no other guests in the lobby, no noise in the corridors. It was deserted. Perhaps he was just surprised to see guests at all. Fast asleep, both my boyfriend and I were suddenly woken up to the most terrible noise of a woman screaming. Really screaming, like in pain or some sort of scared to death noise. It was like it was in the walls, all around us. It lasted long enough for us to really wake up and hear it, and not to think it was a dream or just a loud noise we'd misinterpreted. Then it stopped. I was absolutely terrified. I was ready to leg it out of that door and down the road. After a little bit, I calmed down some. My boyfriend told me perhaps a gecko got into the air conditioning. There was no air conditioning, and also, that's ridiculous. But I was so tired, I told myself that must have been it, and eventually went back to sleep. The next morning felt very, very creepy. And this is in the daylight, in a beautiful, hot country, not something you associate with creepy feelings. Neither of us said anything. We just packed up our stuff and got the hell out of there, even though we paid for another night. We went to a nearby travel agent, not really sure what we were doing. The lady was lovely and booked us into a bureau a bit further out of the city. Then she asked where we'd been staying, and we told her the name of the hostel. She looked at us like she'd seen a ghost. She said there had been a terrible, terrible murder at that hostel the previous summer, and 3 women were killed. She told us everyone says it's haunted and no one stays there. Well, it certainly explains the almost free price. This was about 15 years ago, but I keep a travel diary, and this is what I found under that date. We learned that our hostel had been the scene of a horrific murder a few years back. The night before, a horrific scream had woke me up, despite wearing earplugs. Very scary. Every April, my family spends a week at our lake house in Louisiana. This year, we took my cousin because his parents were fighting again. My uncle is a real prick, so he stays with us a lot. Benji is 12 and on the way to being just like his father, so, needless to say, I wasn't happy to be stuck with him for an entire week. At least when he stayed with us at home, I could go out with friends. I know when you think lake house, you imagine swimming and jet skis, but it's not that kind of place. At least not this lake. It's all swampland and alligators, and that's how we could afford the property in the first place. If anything, it's more of a lake shack. There were too many snakes and bugs for my taste, so I usually watch TV and play Xbox. Benji, however, is an avid little fisherman, and his favorite kind is noodling. If you're not familiar with the term, it's also called hand fishing. It's illegal in over half the state, so allow me to explain. Noodling is when you go into muddy water and stick your arm into a giant catfish hole. If you're lucky, the fish will latch on and you can pull it out. Sounds fun, right? There's a few problems. It can be fairly dangerous for a number of reasons. Chief among those reasons, lots of things live in holes, snakes and snapping turtles among them. The first rule is to never stick your hand in a hole that's not 100% submerged. You also want to wear a protective glove, if not a full sleeve, or you can get cut up pretty badly. Our first day on the lake, Benji wanted to go noodling, but my parents warned him about the gators and reminded him that noodling season wouldn't even start until next month. For the next 2 days, Benji fished from the pier, and we all did our own thing. On the third day, my parents drove into town, and I was placed on babysitting duty. Benji immediately went back to the pier, and I went to my Xbox. All should have been well, but an hour later, I heard his screams. They were the kind of screams that let you know something awful was happening. Filled with pain and terror, I thought someone was attacking him, so I grabbed my dad's rifle on the way out, but it was so much worse than I thought. As I would later learn, Benji saw my parents leaving as a chance to go noodling. He didn't have his glove, and he had never done it without his dad being there to watch over him. After a couple of empty holes, he tried one that had some kind of sharp debris sticking through the wall. It cut into his forearm and down the length of his hand before he could get free. To hide what he had done, he tried to wash the blood off in the lake, hoping to wrap his arm in a t-shirt and bandage the wound before anyone noticed. Unfortunately, splashing your bloody hand in alligator-infested waters is a very bad thing to do, especially when you're a small boy. He never even noticed the gator as it approached, only after it lunged. It latched onto his hand and began dragging him down. That's when the screaming started. The water he was standing in was just over ankle deep, but the gator was trying to get him in a death roll. I was halfway there when the gator flipped him over. Benji's head went beneath the water, and I thought he was dead. I imagined explaining to my parents and the police how his parents would react, but just as quickly he was back, screaming louder than ever, but flailing too much to see anything more than a blur of movement. Suddenly, I was in the water with him. The gator was just making his second death roll attempt, and I fired straight into its underbelly. Its mouth opened, and I dragged Benji out of the lake by his good arm. He was still screaming bloody murder. People from the other houses were making their way down to us. 3 other guys put the alligator out of its misery, while someone else called an ambulance. I was in total shock. It wasn't until some lady started tending to Benji's wound that I saw the damage. His hand was barely left attached. It just hung there by a thin strip of skin and muscle, like a dead piece of meat. I could see jagged ends of broken bones sticking out of the red-stained flesh, and it made me puke. My parents arrived moments after the paramedics. Benji was airlifted to a hospital with my mom while Dad and I followed in the car. It took us 2 hours to get there. By then, the doctors had determined that there was no chance of saving his hand and had begun surgery. This happened the first week of April, so it's been a couple of weeks now. Benji's home from the hospital, but in poor spirits, as expected. I feel awful. No one has specifically blamed me, but I should have kept a better eye on him. My aunt and uncle openly blamed my parents. I don't know if they'll ever be able to fix their relationship. Even though they won't say it, I know they blame me too. The way they look at me now is just awful. Whoever's fault it was, Benji will pay the price for the rest of his life now. Even if he was being a snotty brat, most kids are. They don't know any better, and no one deserves this kind of lesson at 12 years old. Last year, my boss was out of town, and his wife, Janie, needed help with her food bank deliveries, so I was elected to accompany her. I didn't mind. She was an older woman, just over 5 feet tall and skinny as they come. I didn't want her to have to carry all those boxes by herself. We finished the deliveries without issue, and I offered to help with the grocery shopping while she had me. Afterwards, she stopped at the bank and needed to go inside. I waited in the car, and it was starting to take a while, so I leaned my seat back and dozed off. When I woke up, she was already pulling out of her parking space. We shared some small talk along the way, but then Janie's demeanor suddenly became very serious, and she said that an old white Ford was following us. At first, I thought she was joking or being paranoid, but the way she looked at me, it gave me chills. She may be small, but she's scarier than a grizzly wrapped in hornets. She had been watching the truck ever since leaving the bank, and we'd taken quite a few turns since then. But there's a dozen places they could be trying to reach going that way. We live in a fairly small town. It wasn't unreasonable to think that they were passing through, but Janie was sure. I wasn't too worried until they followed us onto her road. She lives 30 minutes outside of town. Lots of people go past the road, but only a few people live on it. And it wasn't one of her neighbors. Her driveway is over a mile long, so most people mistake it for another turnoff, the white truck included. Once they followed us down the drive, Janie retrieved a gun from her center console and stopped just past the first curve, forcing our stalkers to stop right behind us. The only thing she said to me was, "Call the police and don't get out of the car." I could see the 2 men now. They both looked like a couple of drug addicts, and their truck had definitely seen a few accidents. The pair argued between themselves for a moment before stepping out and calling over to us. The driver asked if we needed any help as he continued to move closer, but the passenger stayed close to the truck. The last thing the driver said was something about being in a hurry and needing to get by. That's when Janie stepped out and pointed her gun at him. While I continued updating the operator, she informed the men that they were in her driveway and that the road we turned off of was a dead end. The driver went stone-faced and stopped speaking while the passenger begged Janie not to shoot them. She turned her attention to the other man and ordered him to come stand next to his friend, away from their truck. In that brief moment of distraction, the driver rushed forward in an attempt to overpower Janie, and she shot him in the stomach. It was the most terrifying thing I've ever seen, and absolutely nothing like the movies. I'll hear that man scream to my dying day. The passenger didn't move, just got on his knees and held his hands up high while he apologized. He claimed that he'd wanted no part of his friend's actions, had begged him to turn back. I didn't super believe him, but hey, maybe it was true. The operator took my call much more seriously after the gunshot and screaming. The driver laid crying and bleeding on the ground until help arrived. He survived, but with all the warrants he had before this incident, he had 12 years in prison after this. His friend had less serious possession charges and spent very little time in jail. We weren't the first ones the driver had followed home. Over the weeks before, 2 other women were followed from the bank and robbed as they tried to enter their homes. The man parked just out of sight and ran back to ambush his victims once the door was unlocked. Both women had suffered broken bones in the struggle, and one was still in the hospital when we were followed. The passenger told the police the other man wouldn't have followed Janie if they had seen me in the car, but I had my seat back when we left the bank. Too bad for them, I guess. But that, my friends, is why you never mess with little old ladies in Texas. They'll shoot your ass. If that had happened to just me, I probably would have been robbed. I'm much more aware of my surroundings now. Howdy. I'm not close with my parents. Dad left when I was young. Mom's an addict that I've recently dissolved my relationship with after multiple heartbreaks, lies, and relapses. This all being said, I'm realizing in my 30s that I have absolutely no clue about my family health history. So I have virtually no idea if I'm susceptible to diabetes, cancers, or any other genetic health condition I should be watching out for during this period of life. Besides addiction, I'm sure I got that one, so I've never bothered to test it. Anyway, I haven't really thought about this part too much until recently. I finally reached the age where they'll be poking around down there, if you know what I mean. So, at my doctor's appointment, the doctor asked me about my father's health. I said I don't know. He gave me a wince and apologized, but that truly didn't bother me. I could give a fuck less about my dad, but it would be helpful to know if he had any scary health problems. After that appointment, I drove home. I experienced something that I've been experiencing. My wife was still at work. We live in a 1-story rambler. The front door enters into our living room, and we have a big 85-inch Samsung TV stationed on the wall across from the door. It essentially acts as a black mirror when it's turned off. Walking in, I unconsciously glance up at the dark screen. In its reflection, I can see the couch down to the edge of the coffee table. I also notice a person standing next to the arm of the couch. The screen isn't a vivid reflection, but it's enough to clearly see the figure standing there. I blink and squint, and it's gone. This has happened before, and to unspook myself, I try to believe that it's some eye goop that's clouded my retina, and continue about my afternoon. Like I said, this wasn't the first time I saw someone standing in the black reflection. I'd say it's been a solid 3 months of me seeing these shadow entities more frequently, and they're not all in the reflection. Several weeks before I even made an appointment with my doctor, I opened the door to the closet, and I felt the pressure of a cat walking through my legs, out from the open door. The sensation made me look down, and I swore I saw a black tail disappear behind my denim jeans. We don't have any animals. I don't know if I'm alone here, but I'm sure that we've all seen things that we think are shadows out of the corner of our eye, once or twice. Again, I'd just chalk those up to that pareidolia thing, but with how often I've been seeing these things, and how they're not just immediately vanishing anymore, I'm scared this could be a mental health thing, which is another reason I've been establishing care with a doctor. I don't want to scare my wife, and I really don't want to tell just any doctor that I'm seeing things. but I haven't experienced any other hallucinations outside my home either. I'm not really sure which route to take as of right now, but I know that I'm not feeling good about these things. I never put much stock into the paranormal, but at this point, I guess it could be a relief. Has anyone ever experienced anything like this? Update. First of all, thanks for anyone who read this and either gave advice or just offered sincere words. I really appreciate it. Secondly, apologies because this update is actually going to be likely longer than my original story. I'm sorry for the delay, but I did end up taking the advice of a lot of people, which was that I should let my wife know what's going on. I kinda knew this was the right move, but understand I was just genuinely afraid of making her afraid, but you all are right. If there's something wrong with me, she needs to know. And if there's something wrong with our house, she needs to know that too. Needless to say, she initially handled it super well. In fact, things just got a lot more interesting, and I guess less scary, for me. I told my wife about the stuff I'd been experiencing, and when I mentioned the cat, she stopped me, grabbed my arm, and said, "No way." I wasn't sure if she was just excited about the story or what, but I told her, yeah, for sure, that happened. Before saying anything else besides, oh my God, she gets up from where we're sitting and grabs her phone. She puts the phone on speakerphone and sets it between us, and that's when I see she's calling her best friend, Jess. I'm confused, so I ask her what she's doing, but before she can answer, Jess answers the phone, and as soon as she does, my wife asks her to please retell the story of what happened to her 3 months ago when she was staying with us. The first thing Jess does is scoff a little and asks my wife, "Oh, so now you believe me." But then she goes right into the story. Jess was staying with us a couple of weeks, visiting from Massachusetts, where my wife and I are originally from. Well, apparently while Jess was here, she had an experience. Both my wife and I were at work, but Jess was getting ready in our room. My wife has a big vanity in our bathroom, which is in our room. While she was sitting there doing her makeup, she felt something brush against her leg. Knowing we didn't have any pets, Jess said that she screamed right away, and then when she looked down, she saw a black tail between her feet. It quickly disappeared behind her the moment she looked down. Only, there's nowhere for anything to disappear to. She said the bathroom door was closed, so she expected to see something running around. After doing a few 360s, she sits back down and calls my wife to tell her the story. My wife thought that it was weird, but figured it was just her friend being in a new space. Maybe it was the tie to her robe, or a towel, or any other number of things. She even suggested her friend dropped a makeup brush, which then brushed against her leg, all of which Jess shut down the first time and continued to shut down on this call. When my wife told Jess about my experience, she kind of freaked out. She made me tell her my story from the top. And when I mentioned the TV shadow not being a one-time thing, she flat out told us that our house was haunted or something. So, I guess that's about where we've landed. I'm a lot less afraid for some reason. Like, I know this is technically terrifying, and neither my wife or me really know what to do to resolve the problem, but I really wasn't looking forward to losing my mind. The problem now is that I can tell that my wife is a little bit paranoid, and though she's also happy I'm not crazy, she's scared of whatever this thing is. Ever since I told her, she keeps asking me if I've seen anything again, where it is, and what it looks like. I tell her every time something happens, but I think that's making things worse. She's starting to ask lots of questions on the internet, and then coming to me with essentially various possibilities. She's obsessing over the fact that she hasn't seen anything like a shadow, but constantly feels like she's being watched. I've tried to do small things that she suggested, rearranging the furniture to a more welcoming and protective feng shui, invested in crystals, but now she wants to get crosses and invite a priest in. Some of you originally recommended that route, So, I guess it's officially time to do something about it. If anyone has suggestions on the real right place to start, or even an actual connection in New England, I'd love those recommendations. I'll be sure to update this if anything comes about, but in the meantime, I appreciate the kindness from strangers on the internet. I don't really have anyone else besides my wife to talk to about this, so thank you. Well, friends, it appears we've reached the end of tonight's episode. Thanks for joining, whether it's your first time or you're a regular. Your support means the world over here. We've got brand new episodes every Friday night. Keep those eyes open for those deep sleep videos, and please subscribe, tap the bell, and you'll never miss a thing. Big thanks to those who shared their stories, and a huge shout out to all of our patrons, whom we appreciate so very much. Tracy S, Tamara K, Monica L, ZoeWatt, Chelle B, Donald C, The Dark Cosmos, Marion T, Rat Girl, Alisha S, Erin G, Nikki H, Mr. Revenant, Naz K, Brendon G, Paul T, Nicholas C, Lissane, Arlene F, and Adrienne. If you want to support the Darkest Hour in other ways, consider joining my Patreon. Check out patreon.com/thedarkesthour or click the link in the description to learn more. Do you have stories like these? I'd love to share them. Send them to me, amandadarkesthour@gmail.com, or on the Darkest Hour subreddit, the Darkest Hour YT. Stay spooky.